Safety first. Safety first. 4, 3, 2, 1, and so what do you think about your success at doing that?
There wasn't.
What was that?
I said there was no success.
There was no success. So what did I ask you to do?
Impossible.
I asked you to do something that was impossible.
Yeah.
Interesting.
They did it. Challenging.
So that's interesting because you said they did it.
Yeah.
So it must not necessarily have been impossible.
Hard.
It was hard. It was challenging.
It needed her to think outside the box. Like the natural instinct was to put the base at the bottom and then try to kind of do something from down up. And she kind of just turned that whole idea the other way around.
On its head, right?
On its head, literally.
Yeah.
And then that was kind of interesting. So
All right,
I
so-
thought it was fascinating to watch that.
Yeah, it is certainly fascinating. It's very fascinating. How much of this is much like your work?
Every day.
Every day. Right. Every day, all alone, trying to balance things, make things happen. So, what I'd like to share with you, hey, how are you? What I'd like to share with you is something that's very interesting. Now, I will say that particular take is a very unique take on doing that. How many of you saw their success and said, let me duplicate what they're doing, or let me try to duplicate what they're doing? How many people did that? Right. Okay. The second round, the second time around. Right? What, were there any other folks who saw what they were doing but was like, I need to try something different? Apparently I saw people trying alternative ways. I saw like a TP style. I saw some other things. Did anyone ever stop to ask them how or why they did that? Huh. Interesting. At any point, did anyone stop and ask for help or directions? No. At any point, did anyone offer? I mean, you guys had it. You saw all these people struggling, right? Did you offer your expertise? No, why is that?
The entertainment was working.
Oh, she said the entertainment was worth it. The entertainment was
You
worth it.
needed some material for your recording.
Yes, you did need some material for me, right? Right. So, again, I want you to think about how this activity might mirror the work that we do, right? The work that we do. All too often we operate in silos. We operate as if we are the only person doing this particular task. When, in fact, when we look around the room, what do we recognize? Yeah, we're all doing the work, right? Some of us do it differently. Some of us do it with different methods, but we all bring a competency. All right. So what I'd like to share with you, and if I may I borrow your nails? Is for you to recognize that these impossible things that we're oftentimes asked to do are in fact possible, that we can do these things. So, but what's necessary is us to build a structure or an infrastructure to be able to replicate what we do, learn from other people, and share our knowledge. I had I don't know if anybody has seen that movie Black Panther. Anyone seen that movie yet, Black Panther?
Yeah.
Did you know we in the United States are Wakanda? People are saying, well, if there's a Wakanda, where is it? I think it's the people in the United States that are Wakanda. We have the greatest infrastructure of technology. We have a great infrastructure of technology. We have access to all sorts of stuff. And all too often, like Wakanda, we keep it to ourselves. Right? We keep all the good stuff to ourselves. So if we can understand that we are all related and that we can build a structure, we can actually make the impossible possible. Right? You can congratulate me, but I want to congratulate you because now it's your turn to replicate what I just did. All right? So I don't know if you were watching, but if you can look at that and see if you can replicate what we just did, that would be great. You guys can talk about that for So was it impossible? Was it an impossible task that you were asked to do? No, it was not an impossible task. However, However, what? What's the lesson?
To try a different way.
We had to what?
To try a different way.
We had to try a different way. We had to be shown how to do it. What else? We had to learn. Right? One of the things, particularly for those of us who are in this kind of space, this diversity space, is that we have to recognize that we don't have to do things the way other people do them. So asking for information and giving information, we don't have to be embarrassed or ashamed of that, where in other contexts, I'm not going to share that. We're in competition. What are we in competition for, right? We're in competition for lives. We're in competition for success, right? So don't be, particularly in these next 3 days, don't be embarrassed or ashamed or feel free to give information to, and I like to use terminologies like brothers and sisters. I hope that doesn't offend anyone, but I really think that we have a brotherhood and a sisterhood of humanity that even in our language, we should start trying to make sure that people recognize our relationships, right? So there is that. So I'm going to go kind of over the overview for the next couple of days, and so today we're really exploring kind of who we are and why are we here. So we'll start shortly, just a bit, kind of talk about the history of schools. So why schools? Schools for what? What is the purpose of school? Secondly, who are we and why are we here? We'll talk about schools as culturally diverse institutions. We'll talk about the importance of roles of religion in school, so looking at this moral compass that we have. As an example, right now we're in Ramadan, which for our Muslim brothers and sisters is an important time of dedication to their faith. And so recognizing the nuances of that is important, right? We just celebrated Pentecost, and for Christians, that is an important time that needs to be recognized, right? So there's that. And then on your table, you'll also see two books. One is case study. These are, and the books are yours. Case studies in education. And Seema, who is one of the authors, will walk us through some of those cases and talk about how we can use those cases to kind of problem solve before we actually have the problems. And that table doesn't have any. So I'll make sure that that we share those. That was actually a hint to not sit at that table, but So as an example, so I mentioned Ramadan, right? And it's funny because people who don't work in this space, who aren't familiar with the importance of religious practices and whatnot, will see a student that they don't particularly see as being a religious student, right? And then their holiday comes, whether it's Yom Kippur, whether it's Ramadan, whether it's the Passover Seders, or the time of Lent, right? And there are special things that happen in that season. And a teacher who's not in the space sees a kid who's traditionally not spiritual or religious, and then that time where their family says, these are the things you have to do, the kid does those things, and the teacher says, well, why are they trying to be religious now? Right? They're not religious any other time, but now they want to da-da-da-da. So we're going to talk about how do you preempt that, and how do you be an ally for your students and their families, as well as talk with your coworkers about how they're thinking, right? I was in one set of trainings, and you'll hear me say this kind of stuff a lot. Well, maybe not a lot, but you'll hear me say these kinds of things. Someone was like, well, why, in this culture, why do they do this, that, or the other thing? And at the core of the question for me was, how does this impact your work? Why do you need to know that? And when they started thinking about it, it became evident to them that they only wanted to know that because they were nosy, right? And so a lot of times we have to separate the need to know stuff from the nosy stuff, right? So what actually helps you in your work, and where are you just being nosy? So day 2, we'll start out with this idea of co-occurring disorders and trauma-informed care. How many people are familiar with those terms or have heard those? Okay, cool. So we'll talk about that, particularly as relates to students and their families, because oftentimes we'll call a behavior a bad behavior when in fact, in the proper context, that could be a good behavior, right? Or we'll see a behavior and not necessarily recognize the importance of understanding the difference between an immigrant and a refugee, particularly as it relates to this idea of co-occurring disorders, right? So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what do those words mean, and how do we make those actionable in our work so that when you talk to your colleagues, you have a wealth of information that you can stand up for your families. We'll also talk about this idea of similarities and differences as it relates to culture. And then the second book at your table is Restorative Justice in Education. And one of the things that we're probably pretty familiar with is kind of this, not only the achievement gap, but the discipline gap that also occurs. And I believe that there are far too many students being introduced to a formal discipline process when a restorative process actually could yield a lot of fruit, right? So Beth Bailey, who's the executive director of Community Mediation and Restorative Services, and Crystal will come and spend some time with us, and then we'll spend some time reflecting on what we've learned in those first 2 days with Jen. And Jen will work us through a process that will actually create she'll teach us how to create circles even in our own spaces. So how do you conduct a circle? What does that look like? And why is that important? And then lastly, on day 3, we'll talk about building schools. We'll have some community resource officers, or RSOs, community resource officers, come and talk about their role as police officers in a school. So what role could they have? What role should they have? And we'll get a chance to kind of talk about that. And then we'll do we'll touch on some personalized learning and how do we engage the student and the family in that process. We'll wrap up with some case study work out of the book, and then we'll spend some time doing some reflection, and that'll be our time. All right. So that's that. So that's what we'll be doing. But I'm really interested in who will be doing that with us. And in your packet, what you should notice is that there are 3 name tags in the folder. And if you wouldn't mind pulling out your name tag. And we have 3 because I know people won't bring it back the next day, right? So, and so, do you have?
Sorry, I don't see my name.
Okay.
Is there an alternative?
You're good. You're good. So I will get you set up.
More people in the space.
Okay, so 4 people. We're doing good. Boy, I'm excited. So what I would do it's a good problem to have. So wherever it makes sense to put those. What I'd like for you to do is just, like for us to each kind of go around the room and just say who we are and what district we work for, and then what is our title. So where do we work and what is our title? And Keisha, can you start for us?
I'm Keisha Lamb, and I'm out of St. Paul Public Schools, Family and Community Liaison.
Wonderful.
Good morning, my name is Janie Justi. I work in Goodhue County Education, and I'm the cultural liaison and the interpreter and translator.
Hi, my name is Maria Medina. I work for Puerto Lake Savage Schools. I'm the cultural liaison for the school district.
My name is Hodan Ahmed. I work at Brunswick Savage Egan School District, and I'm cultural liaison.
My name is Samantha, and I work for school district Burnsville, Egan, and Savage. And I'm actually a secretary for the community ed office. And I also work with the families, translating and using language 50% of the time. So.
Wonderful, thank you.
My name is Mura Yusuf. I'm at the Hopkins Public Schools, cultural liaison, and I'm pursuing the teaching.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
My name is Nara Hassan. I work at the Eastern Carver County School District, and I'm an intercultural specialist.
My name is Madeline. I work for Eastern Carver County School District, and I'm the intercultural specialist at Chaska High School, elementary school.
My name is Ramla Abdi. I also work at Eastern Carver County Public Schools. I'm an intercultural specialist, and I work in Carver Elementary School, one of the newest schools in our county.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
New Hopkins District cultural liaison.
Cartwright, Hopkins School District. My official title is Equity and Integration Assistant, but I work in the Welcome Center.
My name is Carolina Lloyd. I also work for Hopkins Public Schools, and I work with the liaison team and professional development for our community education.
Wonderful.
I'm Joe Johnston. I'm also intercultural specialist at Eastern Carver County Schools.
Maria Johnson, Eastern Carver County. Let's get the intercultural.
Kamasi Vansai, intercultural specialist for Eastern Carver County Schools.
Irma Penke, intercultural specialist for the Eastern Carver County Schools.
Oh, me?
Yes, please.
I'm Jackie Johnston, and I'm the Director of Communication and Equity Work at Eastern Carver County Schools.
They roll deep.
I am Lucia, and I work for the Eastern Carver County Schools in Chaska. I work with La Academia, which is a Spanish immersion or dual language school, preschool, and founding support.
Blanca, Latino Cultural Liaison, Medina Public Schools.
Albert McGee, Equity and Inclusion Specialist in Medina Schools.
Priya Rao, cultural liaison. I work with our South Asian populations in Medina Public Schools.
Yali Becerra, intercultural specialist, Eastern Carver County Schools.
Kabir Ibrahim, cultural liaison at Medina Public Schools.
Anthony Galloway, the Executive Director of Arts Us, it's a Center for African Diasporic Arts and Culture. Formerly worked with in West Metro as a Director of Student Programming for the West Metro Education Program. Hey! And then, well, currently, just my capacity here, I am an MDiv and doctoral candidate at United Theological Seminary. So I'll be kind of blending a whole lot of different worlds together as we talk.
I'm Sue Hammersmith. I'm the retired president of Metropolitan State University, and I'm here today to just help with the program.
So what I'd like for you to do now is, so on the bottom of your name tag there are gender pronouns, and if you, so I just want to take a brief moment to talk about that because my administrative people don't do this work, right? So I asked her to create the name tags, and she said, okay. And I said, make sure you put gender pronouns on there. And she said, well, what do you mean? I said, you know, just put a space for gender pronoun. And she said, oh, okay. So she sent me back the first set, and it said her and his on there. And I was like, okay, well, yeah. So just put gender pronouns on there. Right? And she came back, and she was really confused. Again, she doesn't do this work. She's just my administrative person, and blah, blah, blah. So it occurred to me that that's something we should probably talk about, because one of the things that we know, and we'll talk about some other things too, is that there are lots of ways in which human beings kind of interact. So these don't work so well.
No.
Just so you know. Okay? They look good though. Do they look good? Okay. So talking about that, it is also interesting that people have opinions about stuff like that, right? Like gender pronouns. And what I would like to suggest is that we recognize that we are not a monolith of human beings, and we're not an on and off switch. We're more dimmer switches in a lot of different kind of areas of our lives, and gender roles and gender identities is one of those places. So we operate on a spectrum. I would, if I can talk a little crafts, kind of street language kind of stuff. My friends, when I was growing up, would say I was soft, right? Because I wasn't. We used to play a game. It was a kids game called Smear the Queer. So you throw the ball up in the air, and the person who catches it, everybody, hurts them with the ball. I didn't like that game, so they called me soft. I thought I just made sense. Like, it didn't make sense to get beat up for no reason. So if we can recognize that even in our gender identities, it's fluid, and we're on a spectrum. The same goes for a number of our identities, that we're not necessarily just black and white, or just on and off, but that we actually flow in a number of our identities. So with that in mind, what I'd like you to do is, if you can grab a piece of paper or write on the back of your envelope or in your notes, I want to explore this with you, right? So I walk into this room with power and privilege. I walk into the room with power and privilege. I'm 6'2". I speak English as my primary language. I don't have a felony. I have degrees or letters after my last name because I've matriculated through a number of educational institutions. I'm a conservative Christian. I'm cisgendered, which means that my biology and my ideology of what it means to be male are congruent. I'm a father. I'm married. I'm heterosexual. I'm mildly attractive and extremely humble. Just ask me, I'll tell you. So all of those things give me power and privilege. Power and privilege. However, if I don't recognize my power and privilege, I'll use it as a weapon against other people and say, why aren't you doing? Why don't you have? Why haven't you gotten where I've gotten? Because of my power and privilege. And so what I want you to recognize is your power and privilege. So if you could just write down, just for a couple of minutes, come on in. You can come in and just write down where does some of your power and where does your privilege lie? And we'll do another part of that activity in just a second. So you can write down your power, your privilege. Where do you have privileges? Where do you have power? Is it in your role? Is it in your identity? Is it in your personhood? Where do you have power and privilege? Where do you have power and privilege? All right, I want you to stop right where you are. And what I'd like for you to do now is to think about this